The Maltese archipelago consists of 5 islands in the central Mediterranean Sea, positioned 60 miles to the south of Sicily. Only 3 of these islands are inhabited. Malta Island, which is the largest, along with Gozo and Camino. Malta has a long history going back at least 7,000 years, with a wide range of archaeological remains, from the megalithic temples and underground chambers of prehistory to the Baroque architecture of the medieval period. The most spectacular and enigmatic of the ancient remains on Malta are the Neolithic temples and tombs, built 1,000 years before the pyramids. And Malta has the oldest freestanding stone buildings in the world. One of the most fascinating and mysterious of these megalithic structures is known as the Hall Sophlieni Hypogeum. A hypogeum is a subterranean rock-cut chamber of an ancient building, and there are a number of these type of monuments spread across the Mediterranean, in southern France, Sicily, Sardinia, and Crete. The Hall Sophlieni Hypogeum is an underground tomb and temple complex, extending for around 5,380 square feet, and is located in the town of Paola, which is in the south of Malta Island. The site was discovered by accident in 1902 when workers digging cisterns for new houses above broke through the roof of one of the chambers. The first excavations at the site were performed by Father Emmanuel Magri of the Society of Jesus, and later continued by Dr. Tamiz Zamit, the first curator of Malta's museums department. Between 1905 and 1911, Zamit excavated a fascinating collection of archaeological material from the complex, including human remains, pottery, beads, amulets, and figurines, and he wrote a series of reports of his work at the site that was published from 1910 onward. The Hypogeum was first opened to the public in 1908, while excavations were still taking place. The Hall Sophlieni Hypogeum consists of a series of oval chambers, halls, and niches, set on 3 levels, one underneath the other. Incredibly, the underground structures were all carved out of solid rock in semi-darkness, allegedly using stone mallets and antler picks, and later smoothed over using flint implements. The upper level of the complex consists of a hollow with a central passageway, with burial chambers cut into the natural caves on each side. This is the oldest level of the Hypogeum, in use from 3600 BC to 3300 BC, and is similar in plan to earlier rock-cut tombs found elsewhere on the islands, such as the Shemshia tombs, which date to around 4000 BC. The middle level, 3300 to 3000 BC, was cut into the subsurface rock as an extension of the upper level of the structure. This level exhibits exquisite stoneworking skill in the elaborately carved trilithons, which are a construction with 2 upright posts, with a horizontal one set on top. The trilithons are set in imitation of the built masonry of the above-ground megalithic structures found elsewhere on Malta. This level also contains some of the most important features of the Hypogeum monument, such as the main chamber, the oracle room, and the Holy of the Holies. Most of the wall surfaces in the main chamber originally had a wash of red ochre, tracing out spiral and honeycomb designs, some of which are still visible today. The famous Sleeping Lady, a 12-centimeter-long reclining terracotta figure with traces of red ochre, was recovered either from here or a nearby room which is known as the Snake Pit. Believed to date from around 3000 BC, this corpulent ceramic figure is naked to the waist and wears a fringed skirt. She appears to be in a deep, tranquil sleep on a bed with a rush mattress, along with other similar figurines from the Neolithic sites on Malta and elsewhere in the Mediterranean. The Sleeping Lady has been used as evidence for the theory of universal peace-loving Mother Goddess, or Great Goddess worship in prehistory, proposed by a number of researchers. One interesting theory regarding the Sleeping Lady, whether goddess or not, is that either in a trance or asleep, she may represent a place in the Hypogeum where dreams or trance visions, were interpreted by priests or priestesses. Such a dark subterranean context would have been ideal for the stimulation of such states as it would induce dreams and visions. Alternatively, because the area was used for burials, the statue may be a representation of eternal sleep. The enigmatic sleeping lady figurine is now on display at the National Museum of Archaeology in Valletta, the capital city of Malta. Also on the middle level, the roughly rectangular oracle room has an elaborately decorated ceiling of ochre-painted spirals and a fascinating side chamber, which has the property to amplify and echo a deep human voice. This is referred to as a resonance chamber. Whether this intriguing effect was intentional or not is difficult to say, though the possibility that these strange acoustics were utilized in some religious ceremonies performed in the chambers is an intriguing one. The chamber resonates at an intriguing 111 Hz, which is known to be a healing frequency. Immersing yourself in this frequency can help increase the healing process of internal and external wounds. The Holy of the Holies is perhaps the most elaborately decorated room in the whole complex, with its trilithon door frame and pierced stone or porthole entrance reflecting the architecture of Maltese freestanding Neolithic monuments. The third and lowest level at the hypogeum is 35 feet below street level and has been dated to 3150 to 2500 BC. It consists of a maze of chambers, which were filled with water when discovered in the early 1900s. As there have been no finds of either bones or artifacts from this level, it has been suggested that these chambers here may have been designed as storage for water or grain. Water storage has also been put forward as the possible function of the hypogeum at Knossos on Crete, dated between 2150 and 2000 BC. The primary function of the hypogeum site was certainly as a cemetery, as around 7,000 skeletons have been found in the chambers, ranging in date from 3600 to 2500 BC. In other words, spanning the life of the site itself. This amount of human remains is significantly higher than the tombs could have housed at any one period, indicating, along with the dates of the skeletons, that the complex was used for burials over several centuries. The fact that no human remains were discovered in some rooms, such as the Holy of Holies, would suggest other functions for these parts of the site. Perhaps they were used for funerary rituals involving priests contacting the ancestors. An interesting clue to one of the original functions of the hypogeum is the resemblance of the site to natural caves. The near darkness of the original subterranean chambers and passageways is a little difficult to imagine nowadays with the brightness of the artificial lighting at the site. But originally, whoever was allowed to venture down into the depths of the hypogeum would only have had the dim light of animal fat lamps to help them through the maze of rooms, passageways, and niches. Perhaps what took place inside the hypogeum involved some kind of procession or ritual initiation through the disorienting labyrinth structure, which included passing through porthole entrances into particularly restricted shrines. Such a mysterious subterranean structure as the hypogeum is bound to generate its own legends and folklore. Indeed, there are a host of legendary tales associated with the hypogeum, from disappearing parties of school children to subterranean monsters and underground alien bases. The majority of these stories can be traced back to an article by Richard Walter in the August 1940 edition of the National Geographic magazine entitled Wanderers Awheel in Malta. This wartime piece discusses the various underground passageways on Malta being used as part of the fortifications and defense system of the island. It also states that at one time it was possible to traverse the island using these tunnels, but the government closed the entrances to these tunnels after school children and their teachers became lost in the labyrinth while on a study tour and never returned. Apparently, the parents of the children claimed they could hear cries of the children for weeks afterwards, coming from under the ground in several parts of the island. as if some strange phenomena was beckoning others to their doom. In this single article from the National Geographic lies the origin of a host of contemporary folklore about disappearances and secret tunnels underneath the hypogeum, which has been mostly built up on the internet. The problem is that the original National Geographic article cites no sources for the tale, and no contemporary accounts of the tragedy have ever been discovered. The hypogeum is not mentioned by name in the article, so we are not even sure if the alleged incident even occurred there. The story has the ring of local folklore, perhaps a tale concocted to keep children away from the dangerous tunnels. It also brings to mind the mysterious disappearance of the Australian schoolgirls in Joan Lindsay's novel, Picnic at Hanging Rock, 1967, for many years believed to be a true incident, despite the protestations of the author of the novel. Thanks to a number of stories published first in the 1960s and copied on the internet over the past decade or so, the folklore of the alleged hypogeum disappearance has taken on a life of its own. According to these stories, which conveniently don't cite any sources, 30 children vanished with their teachers while on a study tour of the hypogeum. New elements, with no foundation in fact whatsoever, were added to the archaeology of the hypogeum site itself to make the supposed disappearance more lurid. So we have 30,000 bodies discovered by archaeologists in the chambers, not 7,000. And the remains were all human sacrifices to some underworld god. In the best traditions of the modern folklore of underground archaeological sites, the tunnels underneath the hypogeum are said to stretch for hundreds of miles, all the way to the catacombs underneath Rome. Improving on the original National Geographic article, we are told that a British embassy worker, or in some accounts, an American tourist, called Miss Lois Jessup, discovered a series of tunnels underneath the lower level of the hypogeum, and in an unexplored cavern, she encountered several large hairy creatures with strange powers. Apparently, she later learned that this was the same cavern where the children and their teachers had disappeared sometime in the 1940s, after which the entrance of the hypogeum was sealed off and nobody was allowed to investigate the site. From working at the British Embassy, Miss Lois Jessup went on to become secretary of the New York Flying Saucer Information Bureau. The sources for these bizarre stories include a 1960s printed lecture by one-time director of Borderland Sciences Research Foundation, Riley Crabb, called The Reality of the Cavern World, and a chapter, Malta, Entrance to the Cavern World, in a 1966 book entitled Enigma Fantastique by W. Gordon Allen, essentially a reprint of the Crabb article. There is one element of these bizarre legends about the hypogeum that has some truth to it, however. The site was indeed closed for a number of years between 1992 and 1996, though not because of any mysterious disappearance in its tunnels. The reason was that major conservation work was being carried out due to the damage being done to the limestone walls by years of visitors exhaling carbon dioxide in the enclosed space. To protect against this damage, numbers are now restricted to 80 pre-booked visitors per day, and a microclimate has been installed above the underground chambers to regulate air temperature and humidity. In 1980, the fascinating Hall Sofflieni hypogeum was added to UNESCO's World Heritage List. Strangely enough, when now visiting the hypogeum, visitors are not permitted to photograph, film, or even take audible recordings, while security guards watch over a controlled small group of 20 visitors. Many researchers ponder, why is that, and is there something that is being kept away from the public?
In many places of our planet, there are mysterious creations formed by human hands, such as mazes and labyrinths. Since the Paleolithic age, mazes and spirals have been known to man. Ancient sun worshippers left us their images on stones and mammoth tusks, and later this form was repeated in temple rings, in ancient Russian embroidery, and in ritual dances. Today, we'll look at a very strange labyrinth in Russia. Velosovka is a village in the Gribonovetsky district of Voronezh region, 142 kilometers southeast from the city of Tambov, 600 kilometers south of Moscow. It's part of the Bulsha-Alabushka settlement and was founded in the middle of the 18th century by the presence of Ukrainian origin, settled in the area by Count Warren Soff. Velosovka is a small village, but for the local places in the area, it can be said that it is a strategically located village. If you look for information on the Velosovka labyrinth on the Russian internet sites, you'll get very sensational results. Secrets of dwarfs from the labyrinth and legends of sorcerers, slayers, and magicians, along with mysterious and nasty tiny humanoids. There is also a skull with evidence of trepanation of a triangular shape. Trepanation refers to an ancient surgical intervention in which a hole is drilled or scraped into the human skull. There are also stories about dangerous Soviet archaeologists waiting at the excavations and reluctant locals who warned against disturbing local mounds. There were breakdowns of equipment and the decapitated head of a horse that was left at the camp of some of the archaeologists. Some of them finally fled the area in fear, but others died under mysterious circumstances. Also added to the mix was the story of the Soviet military pilot who was shot over Mongolia in August of 1945. The pilot was actually from the same general area as the Velosovka labyrinth. He survived, but was imprisoned by humanoid creatures no taller than 45 centimeters. When he finally escaped back to the world as we know it, X-rays were taken of the pilot that showed he had a triangular aperture in his skull, the same shape as the skull discovered in the Velosovka labyrinth. Well, such internet tales are basically hoaxes, fake stories surrounding a very unusual discovery made by Soviet archaeologists, and the research continued for some years. It's not just to create money for the Russian tabloids when stories like that are published. According to the archaeologists, these stories come from malicious intent, with the objective being to obfuscate the find and maybe to keep away any curious members of the population. Unfortunately for Russia, the area had been and still is being targeted by the so-called outlaw archaeologists. These Chornyik archaeologists, as they're referred to in Russian, raided the mounds or kurgan, stole the contents, and later sold them to private collectors. Understandably, there's a question about the lost expedition of the Nikolai Proharov and Irina Piskarova, if they ever existed, or more precisely, what if some group that were interested in the labyrinth for whatever reasons acted under their own names? It seems there are never easy cases from Russia, but it's possible that this was a complicated hoax to steer genuine archaeologists and others away. So let us look closely at the Velosovka discoveries and mysteries. One of the people who helped to reveal the facts was researcher of historical sciences, associate professor of the Department of Russian History of Voronezh State Pedagogical University, Valery Beryzutsky. He wrote articles about the discovery back in 1991 in the Soviet archaeological magazine, issue number 3. Then after the hoax became disseminated in a local newspaper, he also published an article and was interviewed by a major Russian newspaper. Looking at other sources, it was unveiled that it was Beryzutsky who organized and participated in the excavation of mounds near the village of Velovska from 1985 to 1996, along with students of the archaeological expedition of the Pedagogical University. An underground labyrinth was discovered by Voronezh archaeologists in the 1980s. The findings of the Voronezh researchers in the barrows or molds or kurgans near Velovska are really unique. So far, the first excavations in 1985 revealed evidence of the Bronze Age from the 3rd to 2nd millennia BC. On one of the Velovska mounds, They encountered an ancient ritual belonging to the tribes who lived in the Bronze Age. The structures of the graves of the creators were tightly clogged up with clay, and as usual it was sheer chance that helped them discover these structures and explore them. At the bottom of the grave pit there were indeed the skeletons of buried people. Other amazing finds were also made there: a flute which was made from the tubular bones of a large bird, intricately decorated clay vessels and bone ornaments. About 20 mounds were studied. Unique data was obtained about the Bronze Age nomads of the Roman Empire, Sarmat, and the nomads of the Golden Horde era of the 13th and 14th century when the Mongols invaded Europe. In 1988, during the excavation of one of the mounds, the archaeologists found a large grave site measuring somewhere around 8 by 8 meters. The find promised something out of the ordinary. In addition to the find, scattered throughout the embankment were fragments of Crimean amphoria and traces of wakes for the deceased. As a result, the remains of a complex underground structure were found. In its center was a large square-shaped pit, obviously once designed to install a wooden or stone pillar. Was it for an idol? Several small human bones lay on the floor of the pit, and the shape and structure of the pit resembled a yurt with its domed ceiling. Leading off the pit were numerous narrow, winding passageways which led together to form a labyrinth. Some of the passages were underground and some were open, but the center of the building could only be accessed on all fours. In the passages they found fragments of ancient dishes, Crimean amphora and jugs. There were also sheep bones and several skulls of horses and front limbs. A yurt, or yurta for those who don't know, is a portable round tent covered with skins or felt and is used as a dwelling by several distinct nomadic groups in the steppes of Central Asia. The structure consists of an angled assembly, or latticework of wood or bamboo for walls, the ribs of a door frame, poles, rafters, and a crown wheel compression ring, possibly steam band. One of the horse skulls contained iron rods with pitchings, metal rods inserted into holes for better horse control possibly. The horse bit shanks allowed the researchers to establish the time of the creation of the labyrinth, which was from the 8th to the 9th century AD. This is the time period of the domination of the tribes of the Khazar Khaganath or Khagani. Is it possible that the Iranians, Bulgarians, Khazars themselves, or smaller nomadic Turkic groups created the mysterious structure? Or was it created by some other tribe now forgotten? The findings of the archaeologists allowed them to come to this conclusion. In the center of the labyrinth there was evidence of ceremonial actions, the ritual sacrifice of horses, sheep and human beings. After the rites were performed, the creators of the labyrinth completely covered it with earth. The labyrinth is unique. There are no similar ones in Europe or Asia. Russian archaeologist Split Nuov and Vinyikov suggested that the Velosovka labyrinth may have been the place of initiation into adult age by members of society. They possibly used the labyrinth to initiate the young men and women of the community into adulthood. Judging the findings there, the priests performed various rituals, including sacrifices, although human remnants may have been brought there for other purposes. Tangled passages, according to archaeologists, served for the ritual of initiation into the introduction of a human being to the pagan religion, a kind of trial for young men or women, if you will. The subject, who would have been in complete darkness, had to find his or way to the center of the labyrinth, where the priest would have conducted the rite of initiation. So it looks like the Velosovka labyrinth has nothing to do with dwarves or inhabitants of Atlantis, but it carries a lot of mysteries concerning the rites that were performed there. To summarize, nothing has really been excavated officially since 1996. The outlaw archaeologists had worked in the area and, of course, appropriated artifacts. They still operate in the Voronezh regional area, probably around Vlasokatul, looking for more mounds. Divers working on a submarine project in McDonald Lake in the Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve, Ontario, Canada, discovered a submerged man-made ancient stone structure, possibly 5,000 to 10,000 years old. For some, this is irrefutable evidence of a long-lost civilization that inhabited the region before the last ice age. One or two researchers have linked the discovery to Canada's Stonehenge, a huge 5,000-year-old stone wheel discovered south of Alberta. Who were the people who constructed these mysterious monuments, and what do they represent? The Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve Limited is a privately owned forest comprising 120 square miles in Halliburton County, Ontario, Canada. The owner and manager of the 25,000-hectare Halliburton Forest is Dr. Peter Schliffenbaum, who inherited it from his father. Recently, various sources on the net carried a story about a submarine survey of McDonald Lake, a popular tourist attraction which apparently took place in 2008. According to the story, during the survey, divers encountered an ancient stone structure which was thought to be proof of the presence of a mysterious ancient culture in the area, life from central Ontario ancestors. Staff at the Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve would often see this unusual stone structure balanced on the top of a rock ledge at a depth of about 40 feet below the present lake level, whilst in the tour submarine, which was in existence for a few years at the site. The structure consists of a 1,000-pound elongated, south-pointing rock sitting on a baseball-sized stone at each side, which in turn rested on a massive slab. Initially, the structure was considered a complex version of a glacial erratic, rocks carried by glaciers thousands of years ago and left where they happened to melt at the end of one of the recent ice ages. However, when various geologists and archaeologists examined images on the subject, some expressed doubts about its natural origin. Their main objection was that the structure has straight edges rather than rounded, which would normally characterize rocks scoured by glaciers. One alternative was that the mysterious structure was man-made, but the problem was, how could that be established? The Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve Limited decided to hire an underwater archaeologist to examine the structure more closely. Apparently, after a brief examination of the structure, this unnamed archaeologist concluded that it was undoubtedly the result of human activity rather than an accident of nature. The company also employed a statistician to calculate the probability of these 7 rocks in the lake falling on top of each other to create what looked like a structure. The statistician determined that the probability of 7 rocks falling into such positions at the right time and place was almost impossible. But if the structure was man-made, what was it? Who built it and when? Some researchers think it resembled the prehistoric stone cairns found throughout the world, which serve as monuments, burial sites, markers for ceremonial land, or even navigational aids. Others think it may be a burial chamber, or perhaps a dolmen. Dolmens are a type of single-chamber megalithic tomb, mostly dating from the early Neolithic 4000 to 3000 BC, found in a variety of places throughout the world, but mostly in northwest Europe, particularly in the region of Brittany, France, Britain and Ireland. The thick layer of silt covering some of the surfaces of the structures indicate that they are very old, but beyond that, without further evidence, it was impossible to say when it was built. However, when geologists were consulted on the matter, they apparently pointed to a drought which may have hit eastern North America between 9000 and 7000 BC. At this time, conditions were so dry that water levels in the Great Lakes were as much as 165 feet lower, and inland lakes like McDonald Lake may well have been at least 40 feet lower than their current levels. If the structure of the McDonald Lake is a prehistoric monument of some kind, why was it situated in such a remote place? One theory is that the sparse local population at the time may have been attracted to the spot by lake trout, often described as glacial relics, as they are a holdover from the Ice Age and live mainly in deep cold water habitats. One geologist suggested that in prehistoric times, McDonald Lake was not a lake at all, but part of an ancient river system, which made an ideal habitat for the trout. But no prehistoric monuments of the cairn or dolmen type exist in the USA, Canada, or anywhere else in the world dated to anywhere near 9,000 to 7,000 BC. Does that make this structure the oldest in the world, or should the glacial erratic theory be examined further? However attractive these explanations for the Lake McDonald structure being a prehistoric monument are, without further evidence obtained in an independent study or excavation unconnected with the Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve Limited, such as contemporary artifacts or signs of man-made tooling marks on the stones, we cannot say this for sure. There are one or two researchers who have linked the underwater structure at Lake McDonald to a mysterious monument known as Canada's Stonehenge. This would make the Lake McDonald prehistoric structure later in date, say around 3000 BC, though still unique to the area. In his 2008 book, Canada's Stonehenge: Astounding Archaeological Discoveries in Canada, England and Wales, author Gordon R. Freeman puts forward the theory that the ancient structure is a prehistoric calendar. A summary of the book on Freeman's website states, "The discovery of a 5,000-year-old sun temple and an ancient time machine, Stone Age calendar, in Canada led scientist Gordon Freeman to groundbreaking discoveries in Stonehenge. During fieldwork and research from 1986 to 2006, Freeman found striking similarities between the surface geometry of the two sites. These similarities push back the boundaries of written history and have far-reaching implications for North American and European history. Could the same mysterious ancient cultures have built Canada's Stonehenge and the Lake McDonald structure? Perhaps they were both related to ancient astronomical observations. Freeman describes what he discovered at the ancient site of Canada's Stonehenge, located in Vulcan County, Alberta, in his book. "I had found an amazingly accurate year-round calendar in this sun temple, marked with rock lines pointing to sunrises and sets at critical dates. I later learned of arguments going on, mainly negative, about whether Stonehenge contained marked observation lines to the summer solstice sunrise and the winter solstice sunset. By applying what I had learned in Alberta to observing sunrises and sets through Stonehenge, I found that an accurate entire year-round calendar exists in Stonehenge." The term Canada's Stonehenge refers to the monument known by archaeologists and historians as Majorville Medicine Wheel. There are between 70 and 150 Native American stone structures known as medicine wheels spread over the northern United States and southern Canada. Though each individual structure is unique, the shape of the most common type of medicine wheel resembles that of a wagon wheel lying on its side, with a central cairn from which lines of cobblestone radiate outwards to a surrounding ring of stones. The diameter of medicine wheels, as well as the number and length of their spokes, varies. The largest so far discovered has a diameter of around 80 feet. Occasionally, there will be a break in the outer stone circle to allow a stone pathway or entrance into the center of the structure, and sometimes one of the spokes can be considerably longer than the others, perhaps signifying the importance of the direction in which it's pointing. The dates of these medicine wheels also vary considerably, but it is acknowledged that the oldest so far investigated is the Majorville Medicine Wheel, which was started around 5,500 years ago. There is no doubt that the wheel may have served some astronomical function, but it is more probable that this would have been part of a wider ritual use, perhaps involving hunting magic or buffalo fertility. This is not to say that Native Americans were not sophisticated enough to build observatories, far from it, but in one sense, to state that the Majorville Medicine Wheel was built only to make complex astronomical calculations is to apply modern Western ideas from a 21st century technology-dominated era back into the past. This explanation reflects our own concerns with timekeeping, calendars, computers and space, not necessarily those of the Native Americans who built and used Canada's Stonehenge. Is it really possible that a stargate or portal was discovered in a cave that goes back to the legends of ancient Greece? The The cave in question resides at Mount Pentelicus near Athens and once was a location of an ancient quarry where marble used to build the Parthenon was cut. It has also been long associated with bizarre happenings, strange goings-on, which have continued right into the modern era. The cave itself is largely hidden by pine forests, and from the outside at least, looks rather ordinary and mundane. However, once inside the 200-foot-long entrance, it begins to open out into a complex tunnel network leading to underground water supplies and various rooms and chambers. One of these tunnels, at least according to legend, will also lead you straight to hell. It is perhaps these legends of the fiery underworld that has led to the many reports of all manner of paranormal activity in the region, including sightings of dark, shadow-like manifestations, strange voices, and even the appearance of UFOs overhead. To say it's a fascinating and unsettling place in equal measure would be a huge understatement. At the entrance of the cave itself, thought to have been added sometime in the 1200s, is a small church. It's believed that the church was built by a Gnostic sect of Christians, not least as there are some very intriguing and out-of-place carvings inside this small church. Back in ancient Greece, it was a site dedicated to the nature god Pan, and there have been several depictions and carvings on the walls of the cave to attest to this. Indeed, intrigue and mystery permeate every stretch of this rocky subterranean network. Over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries, the caves began to build up a reputation for being a hub of paranormal activity. Many of those with an interest in otherworldly phenomena would venture into the cave systems and often claim to hear music coming from somewhere in the distance. Others would claim to have heard strange voices that would come from nowhere. As the technological age unfolded, many who ventured down with cameras and even flashlights would find their devices would falter when required. Perhaps one of the most intriguing and suspicious events of modern times occurred in 1977, when a mysterious group arrived and promptly put the cave off limits to all but their secretive team. Barbed wire was put in place, and guards were permanently stationed at the entrance. Shortly after, heavy-duty machinery and explosives were seen being taken into the cave. This group would never identify who they worked for, and rumors began to swirl around the local area that a multi-nation project was underway involving the Greek military, the United States, and several NATO countries. What's more, many of these rumors suggested that an ancient stargate or portal had been discovered deep in the cave system, one that dated back to the times of ancient Greece and possibly before that. Anyone who approached the cave was barred from entering and unceremoniously walked away. However, over the years, what had once been intense security appeared to be loosened somewhat, and when it was, adventure seekers and investigators began to find ways into the cave systems. And when they did, they would report back on what they saw. And it is some of these encounters that are the most intriguing. One particularly thought-provoking incident that occurred during this time involved a couple who were hiking in the woods that led to the cave. As they neared the entrance, they noticed a strange car on a ledge just overhead. However, despite how long they examined this bizarre scene, they couldn't imagine just how the car had got there in the first place. It should, given the terrain surrounding, have been impossible. They hiked the same route multiple times over the next few days, noticing the same car each time they walked past that particular part of the trail. Eventually, overcome with curiosity, the pair ventured up to the entrance to examine the mysterious vehicle a little more closely. To their surprise, the car appeared to be in pristine, undamaged condition, as if it had been taken straight out of the showroom. There were certainly no blemishes or even dirt marks to suggest it had been driven to where it now rested. As the husband peered inside for a closer look, his wife noticed something in the bushes nearby. A moment later, she let out a terrified scream. Her husband turned around but saw nothing out of the ordinary, although he did see the bushes moving, as if something was scurrying off into them. She eventually told him that she had seen a bizarre, white, oval-shaped creature that had two huge glowing eyes looking at her from out of the bushes. In the days that followed, the husband had his own bizarre encounter when he witnessed an ominous, black disc-shaped craft. The experience left him terrified beyond belief for reasons he couldn't explain. Whatever they witnessed at the cave system, or whatever they took with them, remains unknown. Then in 1983, with no explanation given, the entire military-style operation was suddenly stopped. The personnel withdrew from the area and promptly disappeared. Perhaps even stranger, particularly for such an apparent secret operation, the unit left much of their equipment behind. When people entered the cave, they were met with several ruined and crumbled tunnels, as well as the construction of several concrete bunkers, some of which appeared to have been abandoned halfway through building. A suggestion was put forward that some kind of nuclear bunker had been under construction, but that the project had seemingly been abandoned. None of it made any sense. Why had they taken such a sudden interest, and why had they seemingly been allowed to overtake the cave systems so exclusively? And perhaps most intriguing of all, why had they abandoned the project at what happened to be a moment's notice? Are there otherworldly entities or gateways to other worlds in the Penteli Cave? The answer could be yes, only not in the way many of us might think. It has been put forward that the location might experience unusual electromagnetic fields and frequencies, and what's more, for unknown reasons, these fields are often disturbed, which can result in strange phenomena, as well as having equally obscure effects on the human mind. Some researchers have postulated whether disturbances in electromagnetic fields may result in the opening of portals to other worlds, which may be the reason why such locations often experience high numbers of UFO sightings and other paranormal phenomena. It's also interesting to note that cameras and other electrical devices will often fail to work in such environments. Other researchers suggest these electromagnetic disturbances result in the manifestation of any number of strange entities and objects that are both real and imagined at the same time, a suggestion that, if true, would cause us to contemplate the very nature of our own reality and how we perceive the world around us. Some people have put forward that these electromagnetic fields, if they resonate in a certain way, can cause people to see things that aren't there, or feel a ghostly presence that they can't see. Taken a stage further, the combination of this electromagnetic energy, combined with the potential power of the subconscious brain, could, quite literally, imagine something to life, if only temporarily and very briefly. Whatever the truth, the suggestion that electromagnetic disturbances might be responsible for the bizarre encounters in the region is not too much of a stretch of the imagination. Nor is the idea that discrete agencies of the United States, intelligence agencies for example, would want to secretly study such phenomenon. Might there be some validation to the claims from some corners that the mystery unit that appeared in the late 1970s was indeed studying the effects of electromagnetic disturbance, but that they were experimenting with how it caused hallucinations? Might this explain the sudden lack of guards and security around the facility, where adventure seekers and those of a curious nature being allowed, possibly tempted into the caves so they could become unwitting participants in experiments of reality? Is that why the strange car was positioned above the cave's entrance to draw onlookers? It's also perhaps worth reminding ourselves of the fact that marble stone was quarried from here and used to build the Parthenon in Athens. Given that these ancient sites are more often than not comprised of materials with a high crystal content, which many researchers believe can be electrically charged and manipulated for use in all manner of things, from weightlessness to communication and even the opening of portals, might we consider that this could be the reason for the plethora of strange goings-on in the ancient cave system? Might there have been really something otherworldly about the Penteli Cave? Only further study of it will answer that question, as well as possibly opening our eyes to a new perception of our collective reality. According to the legends of the ancient world, and even those of our contemporary era, gateways to hell can be found all over the planet. From extravagant castles and ancient ruins to discreet doorways and tunnel entrances, and even run-of-the-mill urban houses in otherwise sleepy neighborhoods. Might these legends, however, stem from actual entrances to real-life locations deep under the ground? Indeed, might hell and those who reside there be very real, unseen part of our collective reality, an entire indigenous civilization that has existed alongside us deep under the ground? Perhaps the best place to start would be a seemingly ordinary house in Indiana in the Midwest of the United States. National attention was focused on the property in 2012 amid claims of ghostly goings-on within its walls and even claims of demonic possession. The tenants of the property, a mother and her 2 children, were the focus of the bizarre events, with the mother claiming to have witnessed her 12-year-old daughter floating above her bed. Even more disturbing, this distraught mother was witness to her 9-year-old son hanging upside down from the ceiling, as if he were being held up by a pair of invisible hands. Ultimately, the family could no longer stand the onslaught of unsettling events that were taking place, and they left the property. Not long after having followed their case closely, the host of the television series Ghost Adventures, Zach Bagans, purchased the property in order to live in it and conduct his own investigation. He would claim to have had several encounters with demonic forces in the house and asserted that a portal existed within the property that had to be closed. He would arrange for the house to be completely destroyed before having the rubble and debris collected and locked in a secure storage facility. Not too far away in the woodlands of Blue Ash in Ohio, another gateway to hell is said to exist. Referred to as Satan's Hollow, local legends state that the gateway was opened by a group of Satanists who used a room in the tunnel of a storm drain for their rituals. What's more, this apparent entrance to the underworld is said to be guarded by a mysterious shadow man who will appear to anyone who attempts to enter the gateway. Those who have entered the tunnel system in their efforts to locate the entrance have claimed to have heard unnerving screams coming from deep inside, while others have simply felt such levels of negative energy that they've turned and left. Another intriguing location and apparent entrance to hell can be found in the otherwise sleepy town of Stull in Kansas, where local legends state the devil himself will appear in the cemetery where the apparent gateway exists. Whilst most, even the locals, put these accounts down to urban legend, there are some strange events that have taken place in Stull. Several buildings, for example, have suddenly caught fire, and what's more, no obvious cause has been established. Many paranormal investigators have even captured strange voices on tape in the cemetery. If you venture behind the Black Prince Distillery in Clifton, New Jersey, and enter into the drain network, you'll soon find yourself surrounded by satanic symbols, words, and occult-like graffiti. You might also come across the rotting remains of corpses, said to be the victims of one ritual sacrifice or another. Adding an even darker feel to this already morose location is the fact that the tunnels circle around each other several times, said to be like the 7 circles of hell. Local legend states that there is a central room or chamber at the end of these tunnels that is sealed off by a pair of huge axes. Should a person be able to move, they will be granted entry into what is presumed to be the chamber of the devil himself. A short distance away in the appropriately titled Hellam in Pennsylvania are the alleged 7 gates of hell, which reside in the woodlands just off Trout Run Road. According to legends local to the area, an insane asylum once stood on the land that was surrounded by 7 gates to keep patients inside the grounds. However, when a fire broke out at the facility, these gates only served to trap the patients and ensure a painful, fiery death. Legends further state that only one of these gates is ever visible in the daylight. However, should you pass it at night, you'll soon find yourself in front of another, and then another until you pass through the seventh gate and ultimately into hell. Without a doubt, one of the most intriguing, if unsettling, locations said to offer an entrance to the underworld is Huska Castle, which sits around 50 miles north of Prague in the Czech Republic. The castle, which is said to have been built directly over a bottomless pit that leads to hell, was constructed in the mid-13th century between 1253 and 1278. What's more, at least according to local legend, it was built for one reason, and one reason only: to keep the evil spirits of hell within the confines of its walls. This is perhaps backed up by the fact that all of the windows on the castle are fake and have simply been placed over the top of the thick stone walls. Directly over the alleged gateway to hell inside the castle is a small chapel. Only adding to the already macabre feel, it is claimed that local prisoners who had been sentenced to death were given the opportunity to have their sentences quashed if they agreed to help construct the castle. Part of their duties, however, was to be lowered into the apparently bottomless hole as far as possible and for them to report back what they had seen. Legend states that when the first of these men was lowered into the dark pit, he saw something so terrifying that he let out a scream, unlike anything anyone present had ever heard. Even more harrowing, when he was finally hoisted back up to the surface, he had the appearance of an old man, and his hair had turned completely white. Just what might reside underneath this centuries-old castle is open to debate. Some people believe there is some kind of portal below the small chapel, while others speculate the pit leads not to hell, at least as we would understand it, but to the underworld that is possibly inhabited by an indigenous civilization that is unknown to us. There are also many locations from the ancient world that have long been considered gateways to hell. The Acheron River, for example, which is a real location in the northwest part of Greece, also features heavily in ancient Greek legend and mythology as an entrance to the underworld, and is mentioned in such epics as Virgil's the Aeneid, Dante's Inferno, and Homer's Odyssey. Another apparent entrance to hell, according to the ancient Greek legends, is the Cape Mountain Caves in the south of the country, which was said to be an entrance to the underworld that would allow those who enter there the chance to avoid the ferryman, Charon. What is further interesting about this location is the fact that a temple for the god Poseidon, the brother of Hades, the god of the underworld, can be found here. In the ancient city of Hierapolis, in what is modern-day Pamukkale in Turkey, another intriguing ancient location with a potential gateway to the underworld can be found. In the writings of ancient Greek philosopher Strabo, they stated that the opening to the temple was of sufficient size to admit a man to a great depth. He would continue that once inside the entrance, the space is filled with a cloudy and dark vapor that was so dense it was impossible to see the floor. Even more concerning, any animals that entered the temple would die instantly. The ruins themselves match descriptions of what is called Pluto's Gate in ancient Greek mythology, which was a gateway to the underworld. What is further interesting about the descriptions of this location was a discovery made in 2013 by archaeologists of toxic gases that appeared to be leaking from the doorway of the temple. Much like in the writings of Strabo thousands of years earlier, they would notice how birds that flew particularly close to the temple doorway would simply drop to the ground dead. Perhaps the fact that these locations can be found in such legends should alert us to the fact that these legends might have more truth to them than many of us might think. Are these many entrances to hell real? But do they in fact lead to an underground network of caves and caverns that make up an inner earth, as opposed to the fiery lair of the devil? Might they be inhabited by an indigenous species that withdrew and went underground thousands, perhaps millions of years ago? Perhaps these same entities were responsible for creating these legends in the first place, so as to deter people from entering these out-of-the-way locations deep under the ground. If there is any truth to these claims, then just who might this subterranean civilization be, and why might they have gone underground in the first place. Portmahomac Monastery in eastern Scotland is believed to have been built by the ancient Picts, a mysterious ancient people who once inhabited the north and east of Scotland. Recent research has revealed that the construction of this monastery appears to reflect the golden ratio or divine proportion, as it became known during the Renaissance hundreds of years later. This formula was originally identified by the ancient Greeks, but academics are struggling to understand how a relatively isolated tribe in northwest Europe discovered this supposedly secret architectural formula. Who were the Picts? The ancient Picts were a mysterious and enigmatic race about who little is known for certain. By the time the Old Norse or Viking sagas were being compiled in the 13th century, the memory of the Picts as real people had almost vanished completely, and they had become a semi-mythical race of fairies. Indeed, in popular tradition, perhaps because of the low-roofed or underground structures they built, they were supposed to be small, who were confused with fairies, gnomes, brownies, and similar supernatural creatures. Much of the uncertainty surrounding the Picts is due to the fact that they left no written records. The name Pict may come from the Latin picti, which means painted, and may refer to their custom of body painting or possible even tattooing. Alternatively, they may have referred to them as Pect, the word for ancestors. One theory for their origins comes from the historian Bede, writing in 731, who said that the Picts had come from mainland Europe, possibly Scandinavia, to Northern Ireland to ask for land, but the Irish had refused and sent them on to Scotland. At the time of the Roman invasion of Britain in the 1st century AD, Scotland was inhabited by a number of different Celtic tribes, including the people who would later become known as the Picts. From the accounts of Britain written by ancient classical Greek and Roman authors, it appears that by the 3rd century AD, the predominant peoples of northern Scotland were all known as the Picts. The earliest surviving mention of the Picts dates from AD 297. In a poem in praise of the Roman Emperor Constantius Chlorus, the orator Eumenius mentioned the semi-naked Pict and Hiberni, Irish, as enemies of Rome. Indeed, the Picts' war with the Romans during the occupation was almost continual. It was a war which they ultimately won, as Scotland never fell to the armies of Rome despite numerous attempts to invade. The Pictish nation seems to have comprised of several federations, each with its own leader or king, and by the 7th century there was a united Pictland, which was already partly Christianized. In 843, Kenneth MacAlpin, king of the Scots, also became king of the Picts, united their two lands in a new kingdom of Alba, which eventually evolved into Scotland. After 900 AD, no further mention is made of the Picts. No one is sure what happened to them, why they suddenly vanished from history. However, many researchers believe that they may have merged with the southern Scots and the two cultures became one from then onwards. This unification of the two cultures was also influenced by the danger posed by the Vikings, whose raids along Scotland's northeastern coast were becoming more frequent. The Golden Ratio. The Golden Ratio, symbolized by the Greek letter phi, is a special number approximately equal to 1.618, which appears often in geometry, art, architecture, and other areas. The Golden Ratio is found when a line segment is cut into two pieces of different lengths, so that the ratio of the whole segment to that of the longer segment is equal to the ratio of the longer segment to the shorter segment. In the hugely influential ancient mathematics textbooks, Elements, written by Euclid of Alexandria around 300 BC, the definition reads, "A straight line is said to have been cut in extreme and mean ratio, when, as the whole line is to the greater segment, so is the greater to the lesser." The Golden Ratio is also known as the Golden Section, Golden Mean, or Divine Proportion. While it has always existed, it's not known exactly when it was first discovered and used practically. Researchers believe that it has probably been discovered and rediscovered on numerous occasions throughout history, which may explain why there are several names to describe it. It has been conjectured that the ancient Egyptians may also have used both pi and phi in the design of the Great Pyramids. The classical Greeks are also thought to have based the design of the Parthenon on this proportion, though there is some debate about this. Many researchers claim that if a rectangle is drawn around the face of Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, the ratio of the height to width of that rectangle is equal to the golden ratio. Some also think that da Vinci also used it to define all the basic proportions of his painting The Last Supper. Although there is no proof to show da Vinci consciously used the golden ratio in his work, it is known that he was a close personal friend of Luca Pacioli, who published a 3-volume discourse on the golden ratio in 1509 entitled Divine Proportions. Indeed, da Vinci was responsible for the illustrations used in this work. It's certainly possible that not only da Vinci, but other Renaissance artists used the golden mean in their paintings and sculptures to achieve balance and beauty. But what does all this talk of divine proportions have to do with an ancient Scottish tribe described by the Romans as primitive and half-savage? In fact, the Picts were skilled in farming and possessed a sophisticated culture, which included seagoing trade and the elaborate carving of paintings and stones. Portamahomac is a small fishing village on the shore of Dornoch Firth in northeast Scotland. Between 700 and 1100 Christian Pictish monks lived in a monastery on the site. The Pictish monastery was one of the most important archaeological finds for decades when it was discovered in the mid-90s, and ongoing work on material excavated there is still revealing fascinating information about its inhabitants and the monastery itself. So far, various sculptural fragments have been discovered, as well as Pictish burials and a Viking hoard dating to around 1000 AD, which have been secreted away in the wall of a church. There are also traces of burning in parts of the site, evidence that Viking raiders attacked the community at some point, according to experts. But it's the dimensions of one particular structure, known as the Smith's Hall, within the monastery complex that has attracted the most discussion. According to experts, this horseshoe-shaped building was constructed with an incredible symmetry that went way beyond what was necessary for such a building. When investigated further, the ratios of lengths of different walls and bays inside the window were incredibly found to conform to the principle of the golden ratio. Jean Gowans, former chairman of the Archaeological Heritage Society of Scotland, confessed her astonishment to learn that the Picts had been using the golden section. It's really absolutely fascinating. It's mind-blowing stuff. This is staggering to hear, but I'm not totally surprised. I think they were pretty sophisticated. When you think of all the Pictish stones and the wonderful carvings that they made, a lot more sophisticated than perhaps they are given credit for in public perception. But how did the Picts obtain such archaeological prowess and mathematical knowledge? Martin Carver, a professor of archaeology at York University in the UK, who has worked on the site since the mid-1990s, said, "The most important stone piece at the site has a Latin inscription. That's as common as muck in the Mediterranean, but extremely rare in Scotland. It says, 'This is the cross of Christ in memory of Rio,' and the rest is broken away. Unfortunately, the key bit, the name of the person, is missing. It means there's someone around there who knows how to write in the 8th century. That itself is a revelation." This indicates that at least some of the monks at the site had an extremely sophisticated education for the time, but this alone would not be enough to account for the use of the golden ratio at the monastery. He says, "The Picts have always been an attractive lost people. They are one of the most interesting lost peoples of Europe. The big question is what happened to them, and did they ever really make a kingdom of their own? They were the most extraordinary artists. They could draw a wolf, a salmon, an eagle on a piece of stone with a single line and produce a beautiful naturalistic drawing. Nothing as good as this is found between Portamahomac and Rome. Even the Anglo-Saxons didn't do stone carving as well as the Picts did. Not until the post-Renaissance were people able to get across the character of animals just like that." Why do so many ancient sites sit in or near the 33rd line of latitude? And why have so many historic events of our modern world throughout the 20th century taken place along that same line? When we factor in connections to secret societies, the number 33 shows up time and time again in the most bizarre and thought-provoking ways. Is this nothing more than coincidence, or might there be an altogether more esoteric reason? We should highlight here the research of Gary David, who wrote of some of these apparent coincidental locations in the book The Disinformation Guide to Ancient Aliens, Lost Civilizations, Astonishing Archaeology, and Hidden History. He would start by highlighting the city of Phoenix in Arizona, which sits on the 33rd latitude and was once home to the ancient civilization called the Hohokam. The largest hub of the civilization is known as Snaketown, whose name is an interesting connection to the importance of the serpent in ancient times in general, and which sits almost perfectly on the 33rd line of latitude. At this cultural center of the Hohokam civilization was an advanced astronomical observatory, as well as evidence of a highly advanced irrigation system that covers over 500 miles. If we move along the same line of latitude across the Atlantic Ocean, we find ourselves at the ancient seaport of Tyre, which was part of the Phoenician Empire that stretches back to around 5000 BC. It doesn't take the most eagle-eyed person to see the similarities between Phoenix and Phoenicia. A further intrigue, one of the products that this particular port was famous for was dye that was very distinct purple color, whose name translates to Phoenix and is often the color used to represent the American city today. It perhaps shouldn't surprise us to learn that other ancient cities reside along this 33rd latitude. Baghdad in Iraq, for example, which was once where Babylon and the ancient cities of Mesopotamia stood, a region where multiple ancient temples and structures also reside, sit on the 33rd latitude. If we head further along this line, we come to the location of the White Pyramid in the Xingling Shan Mountains in China. Not only does this pyramid structure exist here, but it's also close to where the famous terracotta warriors stand. Back in the United States, there are other remains of ancient peoples that sit close to this seemingly all-important line of latitude. The ancient city of Moundville, for example, near the Black Warrior River in Alabama, is one of these. And what's more, many of the structures here are almost identical in influence to those of the Hohokam found in the Valley of the Sun near Phoenix, Arizona. Another location near the 33rd latitude is the Poverty Point State Historic Site near Lake Providence in Louisiana, a site thought to have been built almost 4,000 years ago. Further locations include Greenville, Mississippi, and the Winterville Mounds, or the Etowah Indian Mound State Park in Cantorsville in Georgia, where there are also geoglyphs near the Colorado River. All of these mysterious locations reside on the 33rd latitude. In short, the sheer number of ancient locations around the world, as well as many such locations of ancient cultures throughout the United States, are too many for us to ignore. What did these ancient cultures know that we have seemingly since forgotten? It's not just ancient buildings or cities that reside along the 33rd latitude that is of interest to us here, though. Once more, returning to the work of Gary David, the number 33 is of apparent importance in general. For example, if we examine what is arguably one of the biggest turning points in world history, the dropping of the atomic bombs over Japan that ultimately brought the Second World War to an end, albeit by ushering in the nuclear era, we find the discrete influence of 33 here. The president who authorized the strike was Harry S. Truman, who just happened to be the 33rd president of the United States. What's more, Truman became president when his predecessor, Franklin D. Roosevelt, passed away from a cerebral hemorrhage at Warm Springs in Georgia, a location that is only 10 miles from the 33rd line of latitude. Even stranger, the testing grounds of the atomic bombs in New Mexico lie on the 33rd latitude, while the 33rd latitude also runs through both Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the unfortunate destinations of these monstrous weapons. It's further worth noting that, according to some researchers, these megalithic explosions likely alerted any extraterrestrials in our cosmic neck of the woods not only to our present but also our destructive capabilities. So much so that by 1947, only 2 years later, UFO sightings were being increasingly reported around the planet. Of more importance, the infamous crash at Roswell took place in the summer of that year. Coincidentally or not, Roswell also sits on the 33rd latitude. If we keep extraterrestrial visitors in mind for just a moment longer, 50 years after the Roswell incident came the equally infamous Phoenix Lights encounter, which saw hundreds of people witnessed what appeared to be a mammoth V-shaped craft hovering over Phoenix, Arizona. And as we know from earlier, Phoenix sits on the 33rd latitude and would appear to be more important in the big picture of our collective reality than we could possibly suspect. So, to who might the number 33 be important? The most obvious answer to that question would be the Freemasons, whose most prestigious level, unofficially at least, is the 33rd degree of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, and who hold the number 33 as important to the reality of the world around us. And if we accept that the Freemasons had their origins in the Knights Templars, who in turn had their origins, wisdom, and rituals in organizations that dated back to the mystery schools of ancient Egypt and to unknown origins before that, then it's perhaps no surprise that many of these ancient sites sit on the 33rd latitude, and why many locations of importance in the modern world would do likewise. Considering the apparent importance of the Temple of Solomon to Freemasonry, it is perhaps worth noting that the S in Harry S. Truman's name, who was also a Freemason, was said to be Solomon. There are many other seemingly bizarre connections to the importance of the number 33. For example, according to the temperature scale devised by Sir Isaac Newton, water boils at precisely 33 degrees. The human spine, which essentially connects the physical body to the brain, is made of 33 bones or vertebrae. If we look at the lunar calendar cycle, those that don't use some form of intercalculation, the use of an extra day in a leap year, for example, goes through a 33-year cycle. From a religious perspective, Jesus was said to have been 33 years old when he was crucified, while in Islam, prayer beads tend to be arranged into 3 sets of 33. In the opening chapters of Genesis, the name of the divine Elohim appears exactly 33 times. In Buddhism, the second level of heaven is known as Treyas Imisa, which is taken from the word Treyas Trimsat, or 33, the English translation of which is belonging to the 33 gods. Interestingly enough, in Hinduism, their ancient Vedic texts also speak of 33 deities. Can coincidence really explain these bizarre connections to the number 33? Let's remind ourselves once more of the coincidence of the 33rd President of the United States, who authorized the dropping of the first nuclear bombs in history on 2 cities that sat on the 33rd latitude after testing them at a location also on the 33rd latitude, being in a position to do so following the death of his predecessor at a location also on the 33rd line of latitude. And when we remind ourselves that both Truman and Roosevelt were both Freemasons, the notion of coincidence appears to be on increasingly shaky ground. When we look a little further into these Masonic connections, perhaps to the next biggest turning point of the 20th century, the moon landings, we find their influence all over the mission, a mission which left for its lunar destination, incidentally, from none other than Launchpad 33. Even the landing site at the time of the landings for the Apollo 11 moon landing mission was seemingly worked out with the number 33 in mind. According to the records, exactly 33 minutes after Apollo 11 touched down on the lunar surface, the 3 stars of Orion's belt would be perfectly aligned with the moon's horizon. And Orion was particularly important in ancient Egyptian rituals, which in turn has almost certainly heavily influenced Masonic rituals. While many, if not most people, would dismiss these apparent connections to 33, be it in symbolic form or at locations along the 33rd line of latitude, as nothing more than people finding meaning where there isn't any, it would perhaps be to our collective detriment to dismiss them as coincidence so unreservedly and without investigation. Given the number of historical and important locations that reside on or near this line of latitude, as well as the number of times 33 comes up in the most bizarre ways in important, often life-changing circumstances, we might suspect that those very few in the know, perhaps at the echelons of various secret societies and in positions of power and influence, might use this esoteric knowledge to their own limited advantage. With that in mind, we perhaps owe it to ourselves and to future generations to attempt to understand this hidden part of our reality, lest we come under the complete control of a shadowy order that we are collectively blind to, yet unwillingly and unwittingly subservient.